Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. Let me be upfront about something. I am not the kind of person who notices things. My ex-wife used to say I could miss a brass band if it was playing in the next room. She wasn't being cruel about it, just accurate. I have a tendency to move through life with my head pointed forward and my attention narrowed to whatever is directly in front of me. It served me well enough at work for a long time and cost me in other areas. When the marriage ended and the job followed it out the door 6 months later, I had a lot of quiet time to sit with the things I'd spent years managing not to notice. The experience was not as instructive as people tell you it will be. Mostly, it just confirmed that I'd been right to keep moving. So when I tell you it took me 3 nights to register the breathing, I want you to understand that's not carelessness. That's just how I'm built. By the time I noticed it, it had probably already been happening for a while. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Mercer Street, the kind of place that rents cheap because it's technically fine, but never quite comfortable. The hallways smelled like old carpet and someone else's cooking. The radiator in the bedroom knocked and hissed on a schedule that had no relationship to the actual temperature outside. The previous tenant had left a single curtain rod above the closet door for reasons I never figured out, and it rattled softly whenever someone walked heavily in the unit above me. The window in the bathroom fogged up even when I took cold showers, which I mentioned to the super once and never brought up again after seeing his expression. None of that bothered me. After 8 months in a sublet barely large enough to turn around in, the Mercer Street apartment felt like a luxury. I had a bedroom with an actual door. I had a kitchen with 2 burners that both worked. I had enough square footage that I could stand in the middle of the living room and not touch anything. I unpacked my 2 boxes in about 40 minutes and told myself this was the beginning of things getting better, which is the kind of thing you tell yourself when you're not entirely sure you believe it. The closet in the bedroom ran the full length of the east wall, deep and dark, the kind with no light fixture inside, just a pull cord that connected to nothing because at some point the wiring had been removed and never replaced. I kept the door shut because open closets at night bother me in a way I've never been able to fully explain, even to myself. Some leftover thing from childhood, probably. The sense that a dark open space is a kind of invitation to things you'd rather not name. The first 2 nights, I slept fine. Heavy, dreamless sleep. The kind that follows weeks of bad rest and finally getting a space that feels like your own. The 3rd night, I woke up after midnight and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The way you do when your body has decided it's done sleeping but hasn't told your brain why. The radiator was quieter for once. The upstairs neighbor wasn't moving. The building had settled into that particular late-night stillness where you become aware of sounds you'd normally filter out without thinking. The small creaks and hums a building makes when it thinks nobody's listening. That was when I heard it, slow and even, coming from the direction of the closet, in and out, steady as a metronome. I lay there listening to it for what felt like several minutes before my brain finished assembling what it was hearing and sent up the appropriate alarm. By then, I'd already half-catalogued it as a vent or a draft through the old weather stripping, something mechanical with a rhythm that happened to resemble breathing. I got up and pressed my ear to the closet door. It was louder up close, unhurried, the kind of breathing a person does when they're deeply asleep, or when they're very consciously trying to appear calm. I stood there in the dark with my palm flat on the door and told myself it was the building. Old buildings push air through gaps in strange ways. I'd looked inside that closet a dozen times since moving in. There was nothing in there but my clothes on a rail and a box of things I hadn't gotten around to unpacking yet, and the specific smell of a space that had been closed up for a long time. I went back to bed and fell asleep faster than I expected to, which bothered me slightly once I thought about it in the morning. In the morning, I convinced myself I'd been half dreaming, that my brain had been hovering in that loose space between sleep and waking and had manufactured the sound from nothing, the way tired minds sometimes do with ambient noise, turning it into something familiar, something with shape and rhythm and intent. I made coffee, got ready, and left for work without giving it any more thought. That night, it was there again. In, out, slow and even from behind the closet door, patient in a way that made patience feel like the wrong word for it. I lay in the dark and listened for a long time before I turned the lamp on and sat up and really thought about it. I checked my phone. It was nearly 1 in the morning. I'd been asleep for about 2 hours. I started paying closer attention after that, the way you do when something refuses to be explained away. I'd lie in the dark and listen, trying to find a mechanical pattern, some cycle that matched the radiator or the ventilation system clicking on. What I found instead was something that unsettled me more than any strange sound had a right to. It was breathing when I breathed. Not perfectly, not like a clean echo, more like the way a shadow falls slightly behind the thing casting it. I'd inhale, and a half-beat later, the sound from the closet would deepen slightly, adjusting to the pace I'd set. I'd deliberately slow my breathing down, making it long and measured, and after a few cycles, the sound behind the door would follow, gradual enough that I kept second-guessing the connection, wondering if I was inventing a relationship between two unrelated things because my brain needed one. But I tested it over several nights, speeding up, slowing down, holding my breath for a beat, and every time the closet caught up, not instantly, with a slight horrible delay, like something listening carefully and doing its best to keep up. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was pattern matching, because that's what human brains do with sound in the dark. It worked well enough during the day when the apartment was bright and ordinary, and the closet was just a closet. At night, it worked considerably less well. I started waking up tired in a way that sleep wasn't touching. Not the ordinary tired of disrupted rest, but something more specific and harder to shake, like something had been borrowing my energy while I wasn't paying attention and returning it slightly used. I'd wake up feeling like I'd been doing something all night that I couldn't remember. Not dreaming. I wasn't remembering dreams, just the persistent physical sense of effort without any corresponding memory to attach it to. My co-worker Petra mentioned it first. She said I seemed quieter than usual and asked if I was settling in all right. I told her I was still adjusting to the new place, and she accepted that easily enough. But she mentioned it again 2 weeks later without any prompting, and this time she used the word distant. Not tired, not stressed, distant. Like I was present in the room, but some portion of me had gone somewhere else without leaving a note. I didn't know what to do with that, so I filed it away with the other things I wasn't examining closely. Around the 3rd week, I started noticing small things about my days that didn't sit right. Not alarming things, nothing that would concern anyone. Watching from the outside, just a persistent low-level wrongness in the texture of ordinary hours. I'd reach for a memory from earlier in the same day and find the space where it should have been simply empty. Not foggy, not half-formed, just absent. Lunch. A phone call I'd apparently made based on the evidence in my recent calls list. Whether I'd turned the stove off, whether I'd locked the door. Small recent things that normally sit on the surface of your mind for at least a day before they naturally fade. I kept finding myself in the middle of tasks with no memory of starting them. Standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of water I hadn't decided to pour. Sitting on the edge of the bed with my shoes already off and no recollection of taking them off. Once I found myself standing in front of the open closet in the middle of the night, not touching anything, just standing there. And I had no idea how long I'd been standing there or what had brought me to my feet in the first place. I shut the closet door and went back to bed and didn't let myself think about it too carefully. Petra stopped asking if I was all right somewhere around the 4th week. I noticed the absence of it, but couldn't decide what it meant. Whether she'd concluded I was fine, or whether she'd concluded something else entirely and chosen not to say it. I ordered a cheap camera online and set it up on the dresser, angled at the bed. I told myself I was being practical, that I'd watch the footage back and see myself sleeping normally and be able to let the whole thing go with something solid to stand on. I needed something outside my own perception to trust, because my own perception had become a thing I was no longer entirely confident in. I left it recording for 3 nights before I watched any of it. I'm not sure why I waited that long. Some part of me was already preparing for what I might find. I watched the footage on a Thursday morning. For the first hour and 40 minutes of the first night, everything looked normal. Myself asleep, breathing steadily, shifting position the way people do. The closet door was shut. The room was quiet except for the city outside and the occasional knock of the radiator. Then, at some point deep in the middle of the night, my chest stopped moving. I watched myself lying completely still for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Not the shallow stillness of deep sleep, where the rise and fall is small but present. Full stillness, the kind that means something. I was not breathing. My hands were flat at my sides. My face was slack and empty in a way that made me not want to look at it directly. The closet was breathing, slow and even and completely steady, filling the dark room with the only breathing happening in it, keeping time for both of us while I lay motionless on the bed and gave no sign that anything was wrong. I watched it, and then I watched it again, and then I set the laptop on the kitchen counter and stood with my hands braced against the edge for a while, looking at nothing. There were 2 more nights on the footage. I watched the first 10 minutes of each, confirmed that the same thing happened, and closed the laptop. I moved out 9 days later, gave minimal notice, didn't get my deposit back, didn't argue about it. I packed quickly and didn't let myself slow down enough to think too carefully about anything. On the last morning, I stood in the empty bedroom with my last bag over my shoulder and looked at the closet door. I'd intended to leave it shut. That had been my plan going in that morning, a clear and simple intention. Leave the door shut. Some small consideration for whoever came next. I left it open. The decision didn't feel like mine. But then, a lot of small decisions hadn't felt entirely like mine for several weeks by that point, and I had developed a habit of not pulling on those threads too hard. That was 4 months ago. The new apartment is on a higher floor with better light and a closet that has a working light fixture inside it. I tested the switch the first night. I've been leaving it on, which runs counter to every electrical habit I've had my entire adult life. But it feels correct in a way I don't question. The breathing hasn't come back. I've listened for it carefully on the bad nights, the ones where I wake up after midnight for no clear reason and lie there taking stock of the room. Nothing from the closet, nothing from anywhere it shouldn't be. What I keep coming back to is something Petra said about a month after I moved. She looked at me across the break room table and said, "You seem more like yourself lately. Has anyone told you that?" Nobody had. I've been sitting with that ever since, turning it over, trying to decide what it means, what version of myself she was comparing me to, the one from before Mercer Street or the one that came back from it. Whether those are still the same person in all the ways that matter. Whether something that spends weeks breathing in the dark alongside a person, learning their rhythm, borrowing small pieces of their days, whether something like that leaves cleanly when the person moves on. Whether it takes what it learned with it or leaves some of it behind. I don't rewatch the footage. I know what's on it, and 4 viewings was enough. The closet light is on right now. Has been since I moved in. I tell myself it's just a habit I picked up somewhere, the same way you pick up any small habit. Gradually, and without noticing the exact moment, it became a default. I'm sure that's my own idea. I'm almost entirely sure.